Valheim. Should you give it a shot? Hopefully, I'll be able to answer this question for you as I give my first impressions and explore the new early access survival exploration game, Valheim by Iron Gate Studio. Valheim is a survival exploration game set within a procedurally generated Viking purgatory. From rolling hills, open meadows to thick misty forests, and even the open water, Valheim tasks the player with exploring, building, and surviving in a world filled with dangerous enemies. I wanted to jump right in to give you some first impressions on the game from the perspective of a player who hasn't played a survival game for at least a decade. Maybe this can give some insight for others who haven't normally ventured into the survival genre. Early access became available only a few weeks ago for $20 on Steam, and I know I was on the fence as to whether or not I should give this game a shot. Hopefully my experience can help you determine whether or not you want to enter the world of Valheim on your own. Let's go ahead and dive into the very first Artax Gaming first impression. Upon being dropped off in my world by a strangely anthropomorphic raven, I was immediately met with the message, "You are cold." A death sentence, I was sure. I didn't know exactly what this meant for my character in-game, but it did serve to instantly give me an objective with a clear goal in mind. Players find themselves in a quest to track down and slay ancient spirits who reside in this land. With my only experience in the survival genre being early beta Minecraft, my first natural instinct was to start punching trees. As anybody who has been a gamer in the past decade knows, this worked of course, and I was on my journey. As one might expect, wood makes tools, tools get more wood, which makes better tools, so on and so forth. While frustrating at the time, there is some satisfaction in being crushed by the log of the tree which you just chopped down. Details like this will probably keep me coming back for more. With my inventory stocked with wood and stone, I set about building my very first shelter. And this is where I had the first experience which really reminded me that this is in fact still in early access. While that may sound like a complaint, I'm actually excited for the improvements that will come as the game moves out of early access. My first attempts at crafting and building felt a bit clunky to say the least. I found the UI and default controls to be a bit lacking with some serious room for improvement as the game progresses through the development process. Building structures by connecting walls, floors, and ceilings is something that has been pulled off now in seemingly every other game nowadays. Because the building in Valheim doesn't necessarily operate on a strict grid, there can sometimes be frustration in trying to smoothly connect pieces and setting down long sequences of wall or floor. The pixel-perfect precision required sometimes can get really tiring. At the same time, this lack of a rigid building grid would seem to offer a lot in terms of creativity and possibilities when building. The addition of new building pieces as development progresses will be greatly welcomed, as I'm sure anybody who has ever built a structure in a game knows the frustration of getting angled roof pieces to line up seamlessly. While this may sound like a lot of negative feedback, what the crafting lacks in controls and interface, it more than makes up for in attention to detail. In many other games in which construction is featured, building fantastical gravity-defying structures becomes part of the fun. But Iron Gate Studio has brought the construction back down to earth with the addition of some basic physics for construction. No more building a floating platform in the sky supported by a single staircase. Valheim uses a system of foundation pieces and support pieces to make players actually have to use a bit of architecture and design know-how to build structures that are not only visually pleasing, but also structurally sound. For anybody who has interest in things like design, architecture, or construction, I think you'll find a ton of pleasure in trying to build the most elaborate Norse mead hall, Stoic castle, or even Viking ship to sail the open seas. There's a whole world of crafting and building that I haven't even begun to unlock in my first impressions playthrough. The single best case of attention to detail which truly sold me on the $20 cost of the game was when I fell asleep in my hut for the first night, only to awaken with my character dying due to smoke inhalation from the fire. Never in my life would I have considered that in a game I would have to consider building a chimney into my design for my character's survival. What would an exploration be without a world to explore? Valheim's procedurally generated world is stunning to say the least. It's hard to say now in 2021 how much of the game's aesthetic is a deliberate stylistic choice on the part of the developers, and how much of it is due to the early access status. But we live in a world now where cutting-edge graphics are no longer required if the gameplay can stand on its own merits. I'm not one to complain. Having only actually discovered a tiny fraction of the available world, every time I discover a new point of interest or new environment, it keeps me wanting to explore more and more. Fog and dense forests can obscure your view. Lightning strikes provide brief glimpses into the forest around you during the ominous ambiance of a late-night storm. The sense of mystery that comes with a vast, undiscovered expanse of world certainly leaves me wanting to come back for more and discover what's there to offer. Combat is reminiscent of the popular Dark Souls combat system. Basic attacks, heavy attacks, dodges, blocks, and basic combos make up the gist of the combat system. And while it may not be the most fluid system in the world, it's not like it's the sole focus of the game, and I'm sure there are some minor improvements to be made between now and launch. The weapon upgrade system through crafting seems to get pretty advanced, and I'm excited to see what upgrades I'll be able to create to really gear out my character. I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, wow, he's really putting a lot of hope in the future development of this game. And while that may be the case, for only $20, I'm willing to give it a shot and see what happens. The developers seem eager to accept feedback and suggestions. Having only really discovered 2 glaring bugs so far, the experience has been pretty immersive. Co-op and PvP offer another layer of complexity into the game as well. I haven't yet ventured into a public server, but the ability to take one geared and stocked up character to different servers seems intriguing. All things considered, I've so far had an overwhelmingly positive experience with the game, and I've very much only hit the very tip of the iceberg. If survival and crafting games aren't necessarily your thing, then it may take a bit of willpower to get used to the UI and building requirements. But if you enjoy games like this, I think you'll definitely want to give it a shot. I think Valheim is definitely worth the cost to try it out. Before you know it, you'll have sunk several hours into exploring your very first world, and you'll have barely scratched the surface. All in all, these have been my first impressions for Valheim. I hope that this was helpful for you, and maybe you got interested in a new game. Stay tuned for the next Artax Gaming video, and thanks for joining.